I'm Pastor Steve Talmage, along with Pastor Annette Christofferson. We provide a brief introduction to two of the assigned lessons for the upcoming Sunday. We're going to look at the Old Testament first lesson for All Saints Sunday, November 2nd, 2025, and we get to look into the wonderful book of the prophet Daniel. Time and setting, just some background on this. Most ELCA scholars hold that Daniel was not written during the Babylonian exile as often is interpreted, but later, around the time of the Greek rule over Judea, specifically during the reign of Seleucid king Antiochus IV in the 2nd century BCE. This period is, marked by intense cultural and religious pressures on the Jewish community. Antiochus tried to eliminate the Jewish faith. It didn't work, but it was a painful time in the history of the Jewish people. And you maybe have heard of the Maccabee Games in Israel, kind of like a mini Olympics. Well, the Maccabees were great revolutionaries and leaders during this time period of trying to protect Israel from just the brutal assault of Antiochus Epiphanes. There are key anti-Semitic acts of Antiochus. There was clearly evidence of religious persecution and outlying Judaism. He banned key Jewish religious practices such as circumcision, Sabbath observance, and temple sacrifices. Sacred scriptures were burned, and violators faced death. The temple in Jerusalem was desecrated. He plundered the treasures, he erected pagan altars, installed statues of Greek gods, notably Zeus, and even sacrificed pigs, the epitome of ritual impurity in Judaism, on the holy altar. So Antiochus Epiphanes was a horrible dude, but he tried to demonstrate that his gods were more powerful than the God of Israel. And you can imagine the morale of the people of Israel. And again, this is in a long history of having been exiled under Assyria, exiled under the Babylonians, and now you have this Greek presence here, and this Greek presence is just trying to eliminate and destroy everything that's holy and everything that's a part of their Jewish identity. There was forced Hellenization. Jews were compelled to conform to Greek customs, participate in rites considered idolatrous under Jewish law. There was violence and massacre. During riots and revolts, his forces killed many Jews in Jerusalem, including the indiscriminate massacres that targeted men, women, and children. Some were enslaved, tortured, or executed for refusing to abandon their faith. There was martyrdom and defiance. As I said, stories from the Maccabean text recall families and individuals who were killed for refusing to eat pork or violate Jewish laws, highlighting the extent of Antiochus' repression. So what's the purpose of Daniel's book? It got included in the Jewish Bible. It's included in our Bible. The book of Daniel is composed of two main sections: stories of faithful resistance to oppression, which you've just seen what was going on probably in the time of its writing, and apocalyptic visions offering hope out of horrific circumstances. These stories and visions were meant to encourage Jews facing persecution to remain steadfast to their God and their faith, assuring them that despite present suffering, God's justice would ultimately prevail. A word about apocalyptic literature. The second half of Daniel is considered some of the earliest Jewish apocalyptic literature, which was a genre that arose in the 2nd century BCE. It uses symbolic visions and messages of hope for deliverance in the face of persecution. Daniel's visions of empires and the Son of Man reveal a belief in God's control over history and an expectation of future vindication and resurrection for the faithful. Jewish and Christian roots are seen in this story. ELCA scholars recognize Daniel's importance as a bridge between Jewish and Christian thought. The book's imagery and themes influenced later Jewish and Christian understandings of resurrection, judgment, and messianic hope. Daniel also shows early forms of interpretation and engagement with earlier biblical texts, linking prophecy, apocalyptic hope, and community resilience during times of crisis. So it's important, as we looked earlier at the historical context of what was happening to the people of Israel during this time, and how Daniel's words could inspire, encourage, and offer some hope in the face of some of the most horrific suffering that the Jewish people experienced. The text for this Sunday, Daniel 7, 1-3, 15-18, presents Daniel's vision of 4 beasts arising from the chaotic sea, symbolizing the world's powerful empires and the chaos they unleash. But it ultimately affirms that God's faithful people will inherit an everlasting kingdom. From an ELCA Lutheran perspective, this passage is read with an emphasis on hope amid adversity and the promise of God's enduring reign. Daniel's vision begins with 4 distinct beasts emerging from the tumultuous sea, each representing earthly kingdoms marked by violence, danger, and unpredictability. The sea is a common biblical metaphor for chaos and danger, and the beasts illustrate the recurring threats and upheavals that God's people endure in history. The vision and its meaning. Daniel is deeply troubled by what he sees, and he seeks understanding from a heavenly attendant. Unlike the first half of Daniel, where Daniel interprets for others, here Daniel himself is the one seeking answers, highlighting the radical and overwhelming nature of apocalyptic revelation. The angel explains to Daniel that the beasts are 4 kingdoms arising from the earth. But most importantly, the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, signifying God's ultimate victory and the future hope given to the faithful. And again, as we look at history of God's people, history even within our Christian tradition, during some horrific times in world history, when it looked like God is not listening, God is absent, God is not involved, and that other forces and powers seem to be dominating and doing horrific things to the people God claims to have chosen. Daniel's words can speak a word of resilience, of trust, of confidence, that God ultimately will be victorious. And that's really our witness of Good Friday and Easter, isn't it? The focus is less on trying to decode the identity of the beasts and more on pastoral assurances the vision gives. And you can go into a Christian bookstore, you can go online, and there are Bible scholars who will tell you exactly what king or what kingdom each of these 4 animals represents. I have a little graphic here. We don't know for sure because it's apocalyptic literature. It's symbolic. And so any claim to know is really an educated guess. And so we have to be open-minded not to limit God to what some Bible scholar says. Well, we know exactly this is who this intends to speak to. Daniel 7 does not encourage fear, but rather provides comfort amid uncertainty, reminding believers that even in the face of upheaval, God is sovereign, and God will deliver justice in the end. That's our witness of faith. Daniel's experience reflects the struggles and anxieties of the faithful, but assures them that the true future belongs to God's people through God's action, not human achievement. And I know it's hard for any of us when we're going through periods of suffering to claim what Daniel is lifting up, because suffering is something we naturally avoid and protect ourselves from. This passage resonates especially in times of instability, and maybe many of you feel like we're living that now. Encouraging faith communities to trust in God's ultimate justice rather than succumbing to fear or despair. The promise of a kingdom that will not pass away invites Christians to live with hope and courage, resisting oppression and clinging to the knowledge that God's reign is certain and everlasting. We prayed this in the Lord's Prayer. When we end that prayer with the power, the glory of God coming, trusting in that promise, in that petition. Let's look at the lesson. In the first year, King Belshazzar of Babylon, that's why many Bible scholars put Daniel into a specific period of time of Babylon because it's referenced here. But modern scholars tend to say that's the reference to a previous time of exile when the people are going through a horrific time under Antiochus Epiphanes, which is 300 years later after Babylonian exile. Daniel had a dream and visions of his head as he lay in bed. Then he wrote down the dream. I, Daniel, saw in my vision by night the four winds of heaven stirring up the great sea, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. And again, you have framed this in the understanding and time period of history where people believed the world was flat at this time. So if it was flat, there would be four corners. And so we have this, four winds, east, west, north, south, four great beasts coming from all four directions on the compass, and they're coming from the four corners of the earth. Then we have the messianic imagery in verse 13. As I watched in the night visions, I saw one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven. And he came to the Ancient One and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and kingship, that all peoples, nations, and languages would serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that shall not pass away, and his kingship is one that shall never be destroyed. Now, for us, we read this passage and we see the one like a human being coming with the clouds of heaven, and who do we think of? We think of Jesus, the second coming of Jesus. And to him was given dominion and glory, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. So the Christians over the millennia have found in Daniel this presence of Christ, even though Christ hasn't arrived in human history yet in the way that we know him through his birth and his death and his resurrection. Continuing, verse 15, as for me, Daniel, my spirit was troubled within me, and the visions of my head terrified me. I approached one of the attendants to ask him the truth concerning all this. So he said that he would disclose to me the interpretation of the matter. Continuing in 17, as for these four great beasts, four kings shall arise out of the earth, but the holy ones of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. This is that message of hope to those who endure, who are resilient, and even those who are martyred or killed because of their allegiance to Yahweh, to God. The promise and the hope is that these earthly kingdoms are going to rise and fall, which here you got to list Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and then divided Europe. There's no one kingdom that has lasted forever. And our witness and our profession of faith is there is an eternal kingdom that will last forever, and that's God's. And it's given to us to live in, to enjoy, to be blessed by. Lutherans commonly interpret apocalyptic texts not as scripts for world-ending destruction, but as faith-filled visions that point to God's ultimate healing, justice, and promise of new creation. These writings call to Christians to hope, trust, and engagement with the world, not to retreat or despair. In summary, the best interpretation of apocalyptic literature honors its symbolic nature, its message of hope in adversity, and its call to faithful living grounded in God's promises rather than speculation or fear. Well, on this All Saints Sunday, listen to a word of hope being offered to people going through a very difficult time through the words of Daniel. Thanks for watching. God bless. Take care.